Welcome back, guys. Have we ever got something exciting for you today? This is CenterFire Green Line Frangible ammunition, and you have seen this several other times featured here on the channel, but today we're going to actually take a look at the factories and facilities where this ammunition is made here in the northwestern corner of Pennsylvania. For your convenience, and if you'd like to skip through this video in various parts, I will have timestamps in the description down below. In this video, we're going to be visiting the factory that both manufactures the projectiles as well as the loaded ammunition, taking a look at some of the quality control procedures and batch loading procedures that are incorporated into CenterFire's ammunition, running some drills with it on their custom indoor range, and lastly closing out with a Q&A session with Keith, one of CenterFire's head product reps. You guys have seen me test CenterFire projectiles fairly often here on the channel, especially regarding their frangibility aspect and shooting steel up close. Without any further ado, let's jump into it. The CenterFire facility itself is located in Kersey, Pennsylvania, in an area that has a large manufacturing base in the sintered metals industry. The facility itself isn't terribly large, but after you see the inside, the efficiency of which they manufacture the product is evident that they do not need as large of a standard manufacturing floor space as if they were using older technology. There were certain parts of the visit, of course, I was not able to film due to the content being either trade secrets or stuff that's in progress. However, I will show as much as I was allowed to film. As soon as I entered inside the facility, the first thing that struck me was how well presented and cleanly done everything on the inside was. No wall space was wasted, and it was clear that these guys stand behind their product. You can't see it there on the board, but they actually had my name up as part of a little welcoming entrance there, and it was easily apparent that the lobby did an excellent job at showcasing their product and the various lines that they offer to the current market, whether it be for self-defense, duty, or just general training and practice purposes. They had it easily displayed here. Moving over to the display case, we could see a little bit more of the product that CenterFire has manufactured or currently manufactures, and one of my favorites right here, the various projectile offerings they produce all the way from 50 BMG down to 223 caliber and even shotgun pellets. Moving up top here, we have a ballistics gel block showcasing one of their hollow points and looking very similar to the gel testing that I did as well. Out on the factory floor, you can see here these barrels are actually the premixed copper and tin component that comes in from CenterFire's metals distributor and gets turned into the projectiles. The machine you see here is a press set up to take that copper tin powder, pull it into a mold as you can see here on the bottom, and then compress it down to form the rough shape on the projectiles. This one is currently tooled up doing 55 grade for 223-556. However, they can be changed to various calibers by changing the dies.
So now this is before they've gone through the actual heating process, correct? This is just the initial forming?
Yep. So at this point in time, I talked about it's a green compact. So what that means is it's only mechanically held together.
Gotcha.
So the powder shape on this is a very irregular morphology, is what they call the powder particle shape.
Yep.
And so that irregular morphology is actually what holds this together. So if you take a look at it, you can just break that. As far as that part easily breaks in its green state.
Yep.
So what happens then is when we go through our heat treat operation, the tin that's in this product melts.
Yep.
And so what happens, it holds it together. So you have all the strength as far as loading, chambering, that going down the bore, all stays in one part after that. So this is our standard copper tin.
After the actual die pressing and forming process, the projectiles go through a timed heat conveyor, which basically melts down the tin to form as a binding agent to hold the projectile together. After that, they go through this tumbler here to polish off the tin that has gone out to the surface, as well as give them their final surface smoothness, so they are going to be ready to load. At this point, they are to their final dimension specs, as well as their final hardness in preparation for actually being loaded into live cartridges or shipped to the reloader. At this point, moving back to the ammunition reloading side of things, we see brass comes in by barrels, I wish, and you can see here the production side of the floor. We were able to get in here after the main work shift had ended and get a couple shots of this here while all the machines were shut down and not in operation. The red machine you see here is a priming machine. I wish I could have caught that on camera. Man, does that thing move fast. There's another one on the right, and then each of these presses in the back that runs 2 drums are the commercial loading machines and are each set up for a specific caliber and have the batch loading sheets on the side of each machine. Moving back to the quality control side of things, Keith shows me how he sets up the testing rig to test each new lot of ammunition as it's getting pulled off the production line, or if any changes are needed to be made. While the test receiver is universal, each caliber has its own specific barrel and pressure testing gauge associated with it and properly calibrated to that specific cartridge, both for the curvature and for the brass thickness. That's cool. Once the gauge is properly secured down in place, Keith rolls the carriage out here in preparation for warming shots to get the barrel heated up to temp, as well as the actual testing set.
So since this barrel just came out, and it's cold, we're going to fire 3 warm-up shots before we do anything. So round goes in the chamber, reach block up, trigger mechanism in. It's old school extraction. So I'm checking for a couple of things. One, I'm going to use 3 shots to warm up the barrel. I'm going to make sure that I have a gauge imprint on the brass, and it's not too deep, not too shallow. It just kind of has to be there. We're looking for a very light indent on the brass. So these 3 shots will warm up the barrel and get it about room temperature. Turn our ventilation on and you watch the smoke go out the barrel.
Good positive ventilation.
Good. All right, eyes and ears?
Yep.
Okay. Down, receiver. So you can kind of watch as I shoot. You'll see the readout pop up on the screen there, which you can film that.
Okay, I was going to ask, am I good to go?
Though I can't give all the details, I can say that the Ailer software takes into account both velocity as well as all your pressure data for each load that is fired. Once all the test loads are fired, Keith goes back and reviews all the data, passes on any corrections as needed to the floor personnel for the individual charges, and then records everything from that test batch into the batch data sheets for that load. As part of confirming that a load is good to go, we also take it out over onto the range and do some test firing through various firearms. In this case, I had brought my VP9 match along, and Keith let me run that for a couple of drills just to see how everything would cycle, and of course, it cycled perfectly. At this point, I'm just doing some slow fire here, doing my best to get all my shots to stack into one hole on the cardboard. I almost did it. I think afterwards I had maybe 1 or 2 that I pulled off the main group, and then it was time to switch over to the MP5. Keith shows one of the more fun ways that he demonstrates the frangibility of CenterFire projectiles in their box using a full auto MP5.
That looks cool and all, but it tells those guys in the crits, like, okay, this guy's run a sub gun before and he knows how to run it, so I'm going to listen to what he has to say. And that's...
Soon, it was my turn, and I can't tell you how excited I was to actually get to run a full auto MP5, nonetheless suppressed. You'll see here, just for safety, Keith has me run some in semi, then 2-shot burst, and then we move it up to full auto. Without any further ado, let me get out of your way so you can actually hear the shooting.
Give me about 5 rounds semi-auto.
selector's up there. I was like,
It is, yeah. Second gear, 2 round burst. Second gear, yeah. 1 gear go. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, now switch to full. There you go. Full. Yeah, go ahead.
For that last full auto burst, I was simply just tucking it hard into my shoulder and leaning into it. Of course, still had a little bit of muzzle jump. Keith showed me a technique more commonly used on smaller subguns to manage the recoil better, and it made a huge difference.
Pulling with your right hand and pushing with your left to make it free. Got it. Go ahead. Oh, wow, that's much better. A lot easier to control. Much. All right, now you're ready for a full back down. There we go.
Of course, I think it goes without saying that I basically felt like a kid in a candy store at this moment, and that one of my lifelong dreams of getting to run a full auto MP5 had finally come true. For this next bit, I want to see if I was fast enough on the trigger to be able to pull off single shots, even with it being in full auto mode. And I got the first, I think I got a couple shots off, and then after that, I was able to pull off singles.
Got a full set of rest.
Okay.
Also noting that we had perfect reliability, both of the MP5 and the various pistols we shot it through.
Like shooting a red star with a BB gun in the fair.
You know, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, how about it?
That is probably the most fun I've ever had shooting a gun in my entire life. Aside from the gas, but oh man.
I then asked Keith if I could run it without the suppressor, just to compare the difference in recoil and muzzle rise between suppressed and unsuppressed.
Give it the old HK slap. And use that stop angle there. Down on full.
Now it'd be a little different without the suppressor.
A little bit more recoil and rise.
Just a tad, yeah. So just be
I'll do a
prepared.
couple. I'll do a couple.
Yeah,
bursts.
do a couple, yeah. Get the feel for it.
Still not bad and a lot less gas.
Yeah, exactly.
Then we go for the nose.
The increase in muzzle rise and recoil was minimal, and it was still quite controllable. From here, we moved over to shoot TOUR-SinterFire's box test, which Keith will demonstrate for us now. The projectiles are shot in through a layer of cardboard on the front into a hardened steel box.
Yep.
10 rounds.
The powder, which you see here, is what remains of those projectiles, and of course the little bit that is settled to the bottom of the box.
So nothing coming back through the cardboard. So we've got holes going in, but nothing coming out. Then our fragments. So some of these pieces look really big, but since they're copper tin, they're very light. So we've got nothing over 5 grains in here, and that's our spent bullet material of our copper tin bullets left over. A little bit of cardboard in there, here and there, but that's what we got left over.
In order to be considered frangible, the bullet has to break up to within 5% or less of its original mass. In this case, these are 100 grainers. So, like Keith said, 5 grains would be the maximum allowed size for any of the fragments. Now, it's my turn to run the box test.
10 rounds into the box.
Yep.
1 year ago.
Go, and whenever you're ready.
as you can see there on the surface, these are going in, and you'll see they're hitting the steel backer in there, and we have nothing coming back through this surface piece. We open that. That's all the remnants of the projectiles that we just shot in, as well as this little bit here on the bottom. See the back side of the cardboard? Nothing passed through this way either.
So, no ricochet, lead free. That's the hallmark of CenterFire projectiles, is no ricochet, so it allows us to shoot in confined spaces like this without any worry of ricochet, and the projectiles are lead free. This particular ammunition, this was probably a hodgepodge of just stuff that I had laying around in my office of RHA and green line, but we could shoot green line basically in this small room with no ventilation. So we'll be shooting an RHA product that'll have a standard primer, standard lead stiffenate primer, so we will have our ventilation on. We'd have our ventilation on with the green line anyway, just because it's good practice, but you could literally shoot our green line ammunition in a small room like this with no ventilation.
And moving out to the factory floor, I got one last shot here. This kind of shows you the scale of the operation. Of course, we're just looking at one side of it here. And of course, the shipping and receiving bays here. Now let's hop inside to the office for a question and answer session with Keith himself.
So first of all, thanks for obviously having me out here today. It's been obviously a huge pleasure to go to the facility, to get to shoot, do some of the demo stuff. I have a couple questions here. Some of these are from me, some of them are from viewers in the YouTube channel. I guess start off for the guys watching the video here. A little bit of a background, just what brought you to CenterFire and what's kept you here over the years.
Boy, so when I moved, military law enforcement, competitive shooting background, and originally from this part of Pennsylvania, Elk County, Pennsylvania. Grew up here, born and raised, hunting, fishing, getting in trouble as a kid. Left for the military, did that, was in law enforcement for a time, came back home in 1997 because I had heard about CenterFire. And my mother had actually met Joe Benini, the original owner, you've heard about a little bit, and he talked to me about what he was doing. And I was like, yeah, great. They've been messing with frangible ammo since like the 40s and 50s. And Mike talked about the gallery shooting. Mm-hmm. They also used it for anti-aircraft gunnery. Long story, we won't get into it, but I just thought it was kind of a fad. Go back to Washington State, we'll go to our range to qualify, and our union rep was there, and we had to take a class on lead exposure. And I was like, wow, something to this. So being a lifelong shooter and reloader, was totally interested. So I basically moved home for this job. And I started with ended up with another ammunition company at first that was built just to load CenterFire projectiles. And I learned a lot more about commercial loading of ammunition. And you learned a few of those things today, which, if you have a love of reloading and shooting, this was kind of the next level of, commercial loading ammunition and learning about all the different types of gunpowders and primers and how things work, and the pressure testing equipment that we looked at. So it's the love of the shooting and ballistics, and I still get to do training, and I'm still active in a lot of things. And I come to work and I have meetings, and we're talking about how many primers we're going to buy and how many pounds of gunpowder we're going to buy. So it's all things that I'm interested in. This is what I do. It's who I am. It's my hobby. It's a passion. It's a profession. Mm-hmm. I get to shoot on kind of a semi-professional level, and it's a dream come true. Talking about some of the shooters that I've gotten to meet over lunch, that I can call up now and say, put some nachos on, I'm coming over. That's, I saw these people on TV when I was a young cop or in the military, and it's like, wow. And to compete against them, train with them, I mean, that's all the stuff that brought me here, and that's all the stuff that keeps me here. Plus, our team here, when you have people that love their job, like you notice, our COO, Mike, was out there running a machine just now. He does that all the time. Todd's running around here somewhere. He's doing the same thing. Greg hits it hard every day, sometimes too hard. Brian hits it hard every day, sometimes too hard. They have wives, they have families. Mike, he has a wife and 3 kids. Todd has a wife and 2 or 3 kids. I have a light switch. I don't have a dog, a cat, a wife, a family, nothing. So to me, it's like, man, I'd be home. But they like what they do, and they're very good at it. And even, our president, Brandon, quick story about him, and one of the reasons that it's so good to be here is we had ammo that we had to get out. Well, he lives in Idaho. He flew here and worked night shift for 2 weeks to augment production. What other boss does that? What other leader does that? So I tell these guys all the time that outside of the military, these are some of the best leaders that I have ever worked for. So that, and they treat us good. I mean, we work. I mean, we've put some weekends in. I do a lot of travel. They kind of depend on me to say, hey, we need you in Florida tomorrow. Okay, I can go. I go. But when you have a good place to work and your employers know it and they treat you good, it just, when you stay till 6 or 7 o'clock at night, when you could leave at 4 or 5, you don't care. It's not that big a deal because you enjoy it, and you definitely feel like you're getting out of what you put into it. So that's why I'm here, and that's why I stay.
I saw that, and some of the camaraderie aspect too. Not only just coming in, we did our initial kind of meeting everybody and the main staff, and then getting out on the floor, but just in the interactions on the floor with the guys working with each other. I like small company kind of aspects, and it's the perfect size where you know everybody and you can work with each other.
Yep.
And that makes a huge difference.
Sure does.
I know this one's going to kind of depend on the impact angle and stuff. It's a little bit of a technical question. What is the velocity typically required to get sufficient fragmentation on the frangible projectiles? That was a viewer submitted question.
So that depends on the caliber.
Okay.
And it depends on the medium that you're hitting as well. So let's say you're hitting a steel target, 90-degree steel target at 10 yards with a 9mm that's muzzle velocity of our 9mm traveling 1230 to 1250 range. That muzzle velocity at 25 yards is going to probably be down to 1180, 1190, probably just under 1200. Give or take. That is more than enough to break up that 100 grain 9mm projectile. We talked about breaking up to 5% of the projectile's weight. Correct. So if we have a 100 grain projectile, we want it to break up within 5 grains or less. If it's a 155 grain 45, then we've got 8 or 9 grains to make that 5%. So typically a 940, 45, 38 special, and we'll use the 38 special for the example because it's the slowest of our larger caliber pistol bullets. It's 110 grain, traveling at just about 1,000 feet per second.
Okay.
It will reliably break up to the 5% rule, which we use to judge frangibility, at 600 feet per second, 550 feet per second, somewhere in that range.
Impressive.
Yeah.
So you have a good amount of range for it to drop down in speed before.
And even at lower velocities, the particles that it would break up to, even though they're a little bit larger, they're copper tin, so they're lighter, so they're not going to come back and hit you.
Correct.
So, and that lower velocity plays in our favor because, let's say you get some 38 special bullets and you load them so they're at maybe you want to shoot bullseye competition with them, and you're loading them at 650 or 700 feet per second muzzle velocity, and you're shooting them at 25 yards, and you think they're hitting a steel plate. They're going to break, and they only might break in 3 or 4 pieces. But again, that's not good. That velocity is not going to have that much energy to bring anything back to you anyway, and it's already shattered into between maybe 5 and 10 pieces. So pretty much and a 9mm with a muzzle velocity of 1230, you get into that 575 to 675 feet per second range. Any slower than that, it's probably not going to break up to the 5% rule, but will still break up.
Gotcha. So realistically, any practical velocity that you're going to be able to shoot them at to get them to function, unless you're doing what the old timers call like the super light mouse fart loads or something.
Bunny farts.
Yeah.
Mouse farts, bunny farts. Yeah, and typically bullseye shooters. And
Exactly. What you said, that's exactly what I thought of.
Yeah.
Anything at a realistic velocity is going to break up just fine.
Yep.
This one was also a viewer submitted question, and can you address the myth that sintered projectiles can be brittle or easily broken even during the normal loading and firing procedures?
Well, that's not a myth. They are fragile. They are made to break. So they're not that fragile. So once you understand the case flare, which is minimal,
Correct.
and then once you understand the taper crimp, which is also minimal, once you understand that dynamic,
Yep.
they're as easy to handle as a cast lead bullet for the most part. If you over crimp them, you'll know it. They'll break in the press. I think I actually may have told you to do this, is to set up your press with like a heavy crimp, bring it down, and you'll actually hear the bullet like snap in the case. And so you play with it and get a feel for it. There's no measurement where you can like measure the die, because of there's 10 different brands of reloading dies, and even though they're all threaded the same to fit your reloading press, they're all different.
Yep.
So what we tell people to do is flare the case mouth, the minimum amount needed to get the bullet, to lead the bullet into the case, the base of the bullet into the mouth of the case, just enough to set it on there so it stays. Seat the bullet, and then taper crimp, whether it's 389, 40, 45, 38 special, all the pistol calibers. Taper crimp it, and then pull the bullet if you have a kinetic bullet puller. Hopefully if you're a reloader, you have a kinetic bullet puller. If you don't, get one.
That's one of the fundamentals.
So pull it, and if you see a visible ring left around the bullet from the case mouth, that's too much crimp.
Yep.
So that may break in chambering and firing. Back your crimp off, and it might be a quarter turn, less than a quarter turn. Load another one, crimp it, pull it. Once that ring goes away, you're good. As long as the bullet's seated in the case and doesn't move, you're good to go. So it will take a little bit of playing with, but they are fragile. They will break. So think about a sugar cube. I know when I was a kid, sugar cubes were everywhere. You go in a restaurant, instead of getting sugar packets, you get a box, and in that box would be 50 sugar cubes, and they'd say, one lump or two. And if it was a cartoon, they'd hit the head with a shovel twice. If you wanted 2 lumps, you'd get 2 lumps on your head. But that's old Bugs Bunny that's been outlawed, I think. But so sugar cube, it held its form enough to pick it up with your fingers or a spoon. You could even slide it back and forth across the table, so it was compressed enough to hold its shape to do what it needed to do, which was to drop into that cup of coffee and then dissolve. So our bullets are kind of like that, only a lot harder. They're compressed enough to do what they need to do, which is to be loaded and fired, chambered, fired, take their rifling, engraving, leave the muzzle, travel downrange, and do what they're supposed to do. They're very good penetrators in soft tissue. Our flat points, they'll shoot typically through 2 blocks of gel in 9, 40, 45, not so much 38 special or 380, but because of the lower velocity. But they're made to break, but they're also made to stay together if they're loaded properly. And we just shot a bunch. We shot maybe 200 rounds through a suppressed MP5. If they're loaded correctly, they are suppressor safe. That's another question that you're going to get eventually, is are they safe for suppressors? Because I've heard that Frangible is not good for suppressors. And that if they're loaded correctly, they're suppressor safe, because they won't break while they're chambering or while they're firing.
Right.
if you do this long enough and you gather enough information, you're going to hear about baffle strikes with frangible ammo, conventional ammo, jacketed ammo, hollow point ammo. You're going to hear about it. So does that mean it's any particular type of ammunition is unsafe in a suppressor? No, it probably wasn't loaded correctly, whether it be a full metal jacket or a frangible. So hopefully that answers that question.
It does indeed.
Long-winded.
If there's one other thing I can kind of piggyback on that, can you go into the crimp shoulder that's put into the
Sure.
actual projectiles themselves?
So on the auto pistol bullets, the 380, 940, 45, 10 millimeter, there is if you look at the bullet in an optical comparator or with your naked eye, you will see along the shank of the bullet, it kind of comes in a couple thousandths. And we call that a crimp relief. So basically that's the driving band of the bullet is the shank that's going to contact the rifling. Just above that, the OD decreases just a little bit. And when you load it to our recommended overall lengths, which for 9 millimeters 1.120, 40 Smith & Wesson is 1.120, 45 is 1.210, 38 Special, I don't know off the top of my head, so I won't recite it. 380 is like 0.975, I think. So if you follow, what's in our loading guideline, that puts the case mouth just over the shoulder. So you seat the bullet. If my hands are the case mouth, when you taper crimp, they're going to be just above that shoulder. And the reason for that shoulder is the differences in brass thicknesses and the differences in brass length. Because like I told you, 9 millimeter brass, whether it's, there's 20 different manufacturers of brass out there.
Yep.
It's all 9 millimeter brass, yet it's all
same.
different. Could be different thicknesses. So if you have, let's say you wanted to use a longer overall length, which you could do, it just takes a little more research on your part to find out what crimp you have with what brass you have.
Correct.
But if you follow our overall length, that seats the bullet in the case just enough to put the shoulder just below the case mouth, and that gives you probably 3 or 4 thousandths of leeway. And I'm talking, added up on both sides here, so maybe 2 thousandths per side of, and that's a lot when you're talking about moving a piece of metal against another piece of metal, because we know we've learned over the years that not all brass is the same.
Correct.
So even for us commercially, we load basically one main and another kind of backup we have here in brands of brass. That crimp relief alleviates a lot of headache for us. Now, on our revolver bullets, we don't have that relief because that helps facilitate breaking in a revolver. So sometimes with our 38 Special, because the way a revolver is designed, and it doesn't matter if it's old, new, even if the cylinder's perfectly timed or a little bit out of time, we can't put any rhyme or reason to it, because I've had some engineers help me from some bigger ammo companies that have a lot more experience than I. And what we've come up with is some revolvers break them and some don't. And it's a phenomenon. This would be extremely long-winded. I'll try to make it as short as I can. An auto pistol, the bullet is a lot closer to the throat and rifling in the chamber.
Correct.
A revolver, it's not. It has to leave the cylinder, go through a forcing cone,
Yep.
and in the forcing cone, it engages the rifling. So if you ever recover bullets fired from a revolver, whether it's a 30 Special, 357 Magnum, 44 Special Magnum, whatever, you can see what we call skid marks. And what you'll find is rifling that goes like this. And that is the bullet's made its jump into the forcing cone, and it's rifling starting to imprint on it, then it really starts to spin.
Interesting.
Oh yeah. So we think that is what can cause a break in our revolver bullets. Now, is it dangerous? No. What you'll end up with is 2 holes in the target.
Right.
Some people think that's really cool. So we usually have a disclaimer. I don't know if it's in our loading manual or not, but I remember we had a local person here that was selling bullets from their home, and the business is now gone, but they had a disclaimer that said, due to revolvers, you know, if you're shooting 38 Special, 357 Magnum, you can experience, even though you loaded it correctly, you can experience a break. I have a 44 Magnum Ruger Red Hawk at home, never broken a bullet. That's all it's ever had fired through it is CenterFire bullets. 180 grain 44 Magnum bullet. Taken 3 deer with it. We talked about that.
Yep.
Never had a broken bullet. A former employee here that has since retired has the same gun at home, breaks every cylinder. Every 6 rounds, you get 12 holes in the target. So it just depends on the gun. Some you won't experience any, some you'll experience. It might be one certain cylinder chamber that does it. It's hard to tell, but to reduce that breakage, we remove that shoulder.
Got it.
And that reduced breakage by 70%.
Okay.
So our revolver bullets, and we typically only have the 38 Special left. We don't make the 44s anymore. There's not a call for frangible 44 Magnum yet.
Right.
357, there's not a huge market for 357 Magnum, you know, bulk ammunition. And there might be somebody watching this saying, well, I have a need for it. I get it, I do. But you know, and not that not one person isn't important, but you know, we have to, as a company, we have to take the whole, you know, millions and millions and millions of rounds sold. Are we gonna tool up to sell 500 rounds of 357 Magnum in a year?
Right.
No, it's not cost effective. Are we gonna tool up to sell 50 or 80 or 100,000 38 Specials? Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And most guys, well, not all, but most guys are practicing with 38 Specials anyway.
Sure.
Easier to shoot, a little bit cheaper, and so on.
And that's been most, we get a call for 357 Magnum maybe once or twice a year. We say, look, sorry, we load that currently, here's some 38 Special. So the crimp shoulder, the crimp relief in our auto pistol bullets, it's visible once you look at it. If you get the 38 Special bullets or our rifle bullets, our rifle bullets have a cut cam loader.
Correct.
That may come up as a question. But our pistol bullets in the bread and butter 389, 40, 45, 10 millimeter, they do have that relief that helps with brass.
I think that answers it pretty well.
I hope so. I will go ADD off the rails on you.
So on those, you guys do still offer the 38 projectiles for reloaders, correct?
We do, yes.
Can those be used in light 357 Magnum loads for the hand loader?
You could. You'll see a lot of snub-nosed revolvers out there that will actually say 125 grain bullets.
Got it.
Our 38 Special is 110 grain.
Okay, that makes sense.
You could load it in a 357 Magnum, and I will caution you, if you do, be careful, because that bullet is just more suited for the 38 Special. You can do it, but your loads are going to be very inefficient because of that lightweight bullet.
I imagine a little bit extra flame cutting and stuff to the top strap on a traditional revolver then?
Probably, yeah.
I know that's why a lot of the shorties list only 125s and heavier, kind of the flame cutting aspect and stuff. So just be aware of that if you do want to load them in something like a 357. This is one we sort of kind of addressed on the floor. I'm not sure if I got this on video or not, so I'm going to ask you here just in case. What type of hard barriers are CenterFire's special duty line of projectiles designed to penetrate, and which ones are they designed to stop on?
So, just like the flat point copper tin frangible bullets, our special duty bullets, they're the same bullet, they just have a hole either drilled or pressed.
Correct.
We talked about that. The old method was drilling.
Yep.
The new, more efficient method is to mold that hole in the hollow points. So whatever the flat points will break up on, which is anything as hard as themselves or harder, brick, block, concrete, steel, hard, something hard, the hollow points break up on. So let's say a common question we get is, will they shoot through drywall? Yes, they will shoot through drywall. And I will tell you, from having some live experience in the field and being in ballistics for 20 some years, if somebody's selling you a bullet that won't penetrate drywall, it's useless to shoot an animal or use it in self-defense. I'm telling you.
100%.
That is my opinion across the board, and I will challenge it and defend it every day. So they will shoot through drywall. What I tell people is, yes, if you have 2 pieces of drywall with some insulation for an interior wall of your home, they will shoot through it. However, they do start to come apart. So the answer is, you're going to shoot through an interior wall of your home, but you're not going to shoot through your house and the neighbor's house.
Right.
So they'll shoot through a 2x4. They'll shoot through a 2x6. Common, 2-inch, 1.75 inch.
Yeah,
inch and a
nominal.
half, 2x4, whatever. Now, I have had some rough cut 2x4s that were still wet. They're actually a full 2 inches by a full 4 inches. I've had some 9mm get stuck in there.
Impressive.
Yeah, well, it was hard oak, rough cut, still wet.
Yeah.
But what you would pull out of there once you split that block of wood open was like pieces of bullet would fall out.
Yep.
So you shoot them in a dirt pile, you're going to recover an intact bullet, hollow point or not. If there's a rock in there, a piece of sandstone, they hit it, they'll break.
Yep.
If you shoot them at a concrete floor, you're going to get pelted with pieces of concrete, but not pieces of bullet. The bullet's going to disintegrate.
Right.
We can control what the bullet does, but we can't control energy transfer.
Correct.
Can't control that. The only FBI test protocol, and you can look up FBI testing protocol for ballistic gelatin, there is bare gel, light clothing, heavy clothing, drywall, wallboard, plywood, and windshield. So there's 7 test events. The only one we cannot pass with 12 inches of penetration is windshield. Windshield's actually a very good medium for tearing apart a bullet. So some police departments won't carry special duty because they're afraid they're going to have to engage a windshield. Okay, fair enough, right? Most police departments, especially here in Pennsylvania, they come to me with Carhartts and leather biker coats and flannel shirts and say, shoot through this. This is what we're more worried about encountering than a windshield. And it performs exactly the same through, you've done some bare gel testing and have video of that. You've got some new ballistic gel you're taking home with you.
There is some plan to do some through different materials.
put some different materials up there and test it. And I'm going to tell you it's going to work, but find out for yourself and show your viewers that it's going to work.
Absolutely.
And because I've done it, I've shot. I mean, I can't tell you the list of things I've put in front of and molded into ballistic gelatin to shoot bullets into and through to see what they do. So we get calls when people buy our ammunition or our bullets to reload, and they'll say, "Hey, I took this out back and I shot and it went through my 2x4s and my backstop." Well, yeah, it's going to do that. The bullet needs to hit something at least as hard as itself. Again, brick, block, concrete, steel, pavement, sidewalk, steel plate. They will shoot through a car door. They're going to break up as they're doing it, but you will get pieces through a car door. TV screens, glass bottles, toilets, bowling balls. We actually have, did you see the bowling pin?
I saw it sitting there. I didn't know what it was used for.
So the bowling pin, we can get a picture of it. We sent, police department was having a bowling pin competition. And unfortunately I wasn't able to go, but they shot it and one of our bullets went through the pin and is actually sticking out the other side. Intact.
We'll need to get a shot of that.
We'll get a shot of that. So they will penetrate things, and bowling pins are filled with usually some kind of hardwood and covered with plastic. And you know, in the old second chance bowling pins back in the day, which unfortunately I didn't get to take part of, but I know a lot of people that did, it was fun, but people learned a lot about bullets by shooting, you know, these hardwood bowling pins, about what they, you know, what bullets would do and what they wouldn't. So this pin had some holes in it, so I think that bullet found another hole and maybe followed its track, because typically they hit a bowling pin and they break up inside the pin on that hardwood.
Right.
So my best thing to tell anybody is to get some of our ammunition or get some of our component bullets and get them loaded and do some of your own testing. And you can do, you know, you can do it in your backyard as long as it's safe to shoot. You know, don't do this in an apartment complex. Use your head, folks.
Common sense.
Common sense. If it's safe to shoot, you know, shoot a 5-gallon jug. Shoot an old phone book or newspapers in a box that you've wetted or dry. You know, shoot some 2x4s, shoot some plywood. Do some of your own testing and find out for yourself before you make these assumptions of, oh, this 100%. Stuff will break up on drywall, but I can kill a rhino with it. Not true. Not going to happen. Does that answer your question?
That answers it perfectly.
Okay. All right.
Let's see here. There was one I'm trying to find because it was worded a certain way. We had a question from a viewer here.
Okay.
Oh, here it is. Is there any potential for a tungsten powder additive or something to increase the weight of the alloy so that you're looking at roughly the same physical density as a traditional cut and core design bullet?
So we've talked about it, we've done it, we've experimented with a whole bunch of different materials. And when you start to add tungsten, you have two problems. One is cost. Tungsten is super expensive. And there's a lot of tungsten cord projectiles out there. They have to have a jacket on them because you do not want compressed tungsten or machined tungsten in contact with a steel barrel.
Correct.
It's not gonna end well. You're gonna wear out your barrel in a few hundred rounds, if not before. So you have barrel wear issues and you have cost issues. For us, it's a cost issue. And even if we were to add, let's say, 10% tungsten to our mix, that would drive the cost not out of reach, but it would drive the cost into a premium hunting line of ammunition.
Got it.
So yes, we could. We've looked at it, and it's not to say that we may not someday. We are looking at new materials that are inexpensive to use as bullet jackets. So, you know, with what the metals market may do someday, hopefully it comes down. For our sake as a company and for your sake as a consumer, you know, material cost is what it is. We have to pay it.
And we are filming this in late 2022.
Yeah, so, you know, metals market's insane. And unfortunately, for us to make money, we have to buy that material at a certain cost and add to it.
Correct.
I wish we didn't.
Got to pay your guys.
You know,
too.
as a shooter, as a shooter, I wish we could make, you know, a box of 9mm for, you know, $5 for 50 rounds. I legitimately wish that, but we just can't do it.
Yeah.
So yes, we've looked at tungsten, and again, it's cost, and it's, even if we make it, then how are we going to package it? Are we going to put it in a jacket?
Right.
That's going to add even more cost. So the answer is yes, we've looked at it. In the near future, and I mean the next 2 or 3 years, no, we're not going to do it. But that's not to say that we'll never do it.
Right.
We could possibly do it someday. We know how to do it. We already have designs that we could use, but for the foreseeable future, no, we're not.
Understood. And that makes perfect sense too.
I really wish we could. I wish the copper was less expensive, because a tungsten copper mix would be perfect to make. You know, we could make a lead-free, maybe number 7, 7.5 shot. I grew up as a trap, predominantly trap. I started shooting when I was 12. and when I would see, you know, truckloads of shotgun shell hulls being removed from Elysburg, where they have the Pennsylvania State Shoot, I was like, wow. Well, then when I got in the ammunition, it's like, wow, if we could make, you know, lead-free shotgun pellets that they could use to bust claybirds. And yes, you can use some steel shot, you can use other things. It just doesn't act like lead because it doesn't have the density. There are
like your heavy shots,
shot sizes out there. You have the heavy shot. You have another company's shot. They use a tungsten mix, tungsten matrix.
Oh.
They also want $50 for 10 rounds of turkey ammunition. So again, you know, tungstens, I don't know the exact cost, but I know that, you know, copper's here, tungsten's here.
Yeah.
So it's very cost prohibitive.
And the trap shooter doesn't just go to the range with a 25 round box and call it done.
No, they shoot, you know, a typical shoots 300 rounds, you know, in a weekend.
Yeah.
And that, if you bought that in tungsten, I don't even know what a box of AA is these days.
I'm hand loading my own. I think last time I saw a factory, $12 a box, 25.
Yeah, back in the day, you could get, and I'm talking late 90s, when I got back into trap shooting, they were like $3.75 or $4 a box, maybe $5 a box, maybe $5.75. So I used to go to Walmart and buy my 400 rounds for the weekend and be done, because you couldn't really reload them for that price at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I'm loading them now for $8.50, $9 a box or so for just a regular like 1 ounce AA equivalent load, and it's not much savings over factory, but it does add up too.
It can, yeah. It did for me when I was a kid. But as I got older, I figured if I was paying myself like 25 cents an hour, it just didn't, it was cost prohibitive. So I just went and bought it.
Yep. As far as, at least from a reloader standpoint, what are the best channels to get actual projectile components from you guys for reloading with today's market?
Right now it's Midway USA. We did, you know, Greg explained earlier that we had a web store. Excuse me. And pre-COVID, we had really good web store years and kind of slow web store years, depending on what was going on. Once we got into the civil unrest, COVID ammunition craziness, we couldn't keep up with it. You know, you saw that we're a small company, and for us to answer all the emails and phone calls and trying to process, you know, somebody calling and wanting a 50 round box of 9mm or 100 pieces of 9mm bullets to reload, we just could not keep up with that. So we decided to shut the web store down. We've had some iterations of planning to bring it back to life. I don't know when that's going to be. I can't even give you a ballpark answer on when we're going to do that. But for right now, it's Midway USA. Midway's been super to work with. They give us orders, we fill them. They've worked with us on load data and information for customers on their website, and their Midway's shipping policy. They do a fantastic job.
They really do.
I buy a lot of stuff from Midway still for myself.
They're one of the best shipping companies
and
in the
it's here
industry.
in, you know, they say it's going to, if I order on Monday and they say it's going to be here on Thursday, it's usually here on Wednesday.
Yep.
So, because we get, you know, if I need any replacement gun parts usually for our test guns in the vault, which you got to see. He cried, by the way, when he saw our vaults. He little tear.
I was like, he let me in here?
Yeah. They've been great to work with. So, and I don't know exactly what of our products they carry right now. I'm not really in that. I just talked to them about kind of technical things and loading data stuff, and was answering a lot of questions like this from a lot of their customers, whether it be from a direct email. And if any of you get, you know, CenterFire bullets or questions, you can find me. If you go to CenterFire.com, you can find me, you can find my email, and
he's a really good guy to work with. I've been pestering him for like over a month.
I'll answer, you know, whatever questions you have. You know, even if it's a complaint, let me hear about it, because we're always learning. We're always learning, and I've learned, you know, from some of the best competitive shooters in the world. The first thing they'll tell you is, I'm always learning. always learning. So I've taken that attitude, and I've talked to Alex about, you know, some books to read. Hatcher's Notebook, get that, it's on Amazon. There's another one called The Bullet's Flight from Powder to Target. This was all done with cast lead, paper patch projectiles, and a lot of black powder.
Okay.
So it was, Hatcher's Notebook was from like the transition from smoke, or, you know, black powder into the 30-40 Craig, you know, the 30 military 30-06, kind of the modern age of smokeless powder and jacketed projectiles. The other one was done in previous to that. And I got to tell you, it's like watching paint dry reading this book. But The Bullet's Flight from Powder to Target and Hatcher's Notebook are two really good ones. And one that I just finished is called Ammunition for Dummies. I can't remember the title of it. I will get Alex the title of that book, and it is it was a ballistic engineer took all of his 22 long rifle up to like 30 millimeter cannon experience.
Wow.
And packed it into a book and said, you know, read this. And I learned a lot about how what I was talking to about bullet, how it interacts with case, neck, and shoulder.
Yep.
About its retention, and about that that interaction with the chamber and a throat or a forcing cone, and how efficient that can be or how inefficient it can be, and how much it affects load data, internal, external, and terminal ballistics. How much, not so much terminal ballistics, but internal ballistics. You know, what happens inside that firearms chamber is extremely important. And it's, you know, there's a lot of myths out there on what happens in there. And then one thing I would highly recommend is any reloading manual, whether it be from Speer, Winchester, Hodgdon, Shooter's World, wherever, they have a lot of really good information in them. And again, always learning. Ammunition encyclopedias.
Yep.
They're up to like volume 40 or whatever. And one of the authors, Mike Bussard, we call him Buzzard, he's been around forever and he knows tons of stuff. Ammunition history, bullet history, gunpowder history, cartridge case, brass history, primer history. I've read, I think, every one of those books. They're stacked up at home. And I've learned something new every time. You know, get these books and read them. Because if you're interested in reloading at all, they're going to be interesting to you.
Yep. So is it safe to assume that when using centerfire projectiles, at least the standard just flat nose, that at least to the reloader, your faster for caliber powders are going to be a better option because of the lighter weight of the projectiles? Safe assumption, contradict it, what do you think?
In a caliber like 9mm, so powders like tight group.
Correct.
Super fast, high flame temperature, clean burning.
Yep.
The only, not problem, but the only caveat is when I told you we use that powder a lot. And when we use, say, a powder like Accurate Arms 2460 rifle ball powder, common ball powder, usually we increase or decrease by 0.3 of a grain. When we use tight group, we increase by or decrease by 1/10 of a grain.
Yes.
That's it, and it can make a difference. So when you use those powders, Accurate Arms number 2, I believe.
Yes, that's the very fast one.
Really fast powder. Some people, some reloaders, they go by a half grain. They increase, decrease, rifle, pistol, shotgun, half grain.
Ooh.
Okay, well, and if you look at reloading manuals from the 70s, I'm kind of old, versus today, reloading manuals have gotten a little more conservative.
They have.
Because it's a commercial product, so they have to protect the commercial, you know, the consumer kind of from themselves.
Right.
And I've done it too. When I was a reloader, you know, as a teenager, me and my buddies, we loaded 6mm Remington, 30-06, 308, 243s, 270s. We had the data, we shot. We didn't have a chronograph. We just judged what the bullets did when they hit either milk jugs, water cans, wetted newspaper. You know, that was the thing.
That was a
back in the
classic
day.
one. That was a classic one.
And if the bullet didn't expand enough or penetrate deep enough, we're like, well, we didn't get a flattened primer and the case didn't stick in the gun. Let's go another half a grain. Let's go another half a grain. And typically when something bad happens, and I know I just went on down the rabbit hole here, but when something bad happens, it's typically a combination.
Mm-hmm.
You put too much powder in because you thought, I can go another half a grain. Then you go to the range and it's 100 degrees out that day,
Yep.
and your ammo's sitting in the sun.
Yep.
You start BSing with somebody, and that half a grain you added was okay, but now it's sitting in the sun. And it's 100 degrees, it's in a plastic case, a black box, whatever. So now that ammunition, its temperature's going up.
Yep.
And that's going to increase the chamber pressure as well.
Absolutely.
So now you've just blown a primer and stuck a case in your rifle, if that's all that happens.
Correct.
You know, hopefully nothing comes apart. So typically those things are, you know, the bad things that happen. It's a combination of events that lead up to it. So loading manuals have gotten more conservative.
Yes.
And the faster powders, because of the lightweight bullet, you can get away with powders like Bullseye.
Mm-hmm.
Bullseye is a tried and true powder. I knew a lot of Bullseye shooters that liked it because it was dirty and actually lubricated their guns. At least that's what they believed in their heads. And it was cheap, so they could. And Bullseye worked great. Our 155 grain 45s, our 140 grain 45s, Bullseye is a fantastic powder. But when you want to get into some high performance loads, and you're going to run the edge of pressure and velocity, those faster powders are definitely the way to go.
Pretty well answered. I think that covers it pretty well.
I hope so. I hope so.
When you're looking at your reloading data, keep in mind what your pressures are going to be or what the reloading manual is calling out for your pressures, of course, and make an important note of what your min to max range is. On some powders, that may be as much as like a couple grains. On others, especially some of the fast powders, depending on what you're loading, you might be looking at like a range of maybe 0.6 of a grain from min to max. So use that to your advantage, keep that in mind when you're setting up the load data. And in some cases where it's like, oh, I have an X grain charge of this, I can go up by like half a grain. In other cases, like go up by 1/10 and no more, like pay attention to what you're doing with the particular powder you're using.
Yeah, you have to, you know, more guns today are built to handle plus P ammunition.
Correct.
It's kind of a marketing thing. For 38 special, for 9mm, and the plus P kind of trend that was going on kind of in the late 90s into 2000s, it's not as big as it was. It's still there. You can buy some plus P 9mm, some plus P 38 special, and want to get that extra 100 feet per second, 150 feet per second out of it, which is good. Make sure your gun is meant to handle it, and typically that gun will be marked. Where it's marked, like a 38 special revolver typically is marked on the barrel,
Yep.
caliber. It'll say plus P. There's still, it's rare, but you will find some 9mm plus P plus out there. I had some years ago. It was Remington, and man, that stuff was hot. I wouldn't recommend a steady diet in anything, really. But like Alex said, you know, pay attention to your loading manual, because the people that are making up these loading manuals are people like me at ammo companies and powder companies and bullet companies, and they're shooters too, just like you and I and everybody else.
Yep.
They're shooters too, so they want to get that extra 150 feet per second. They want to get that extra expansion out of their bullet, or that extra penetration out of their bullet, whatever they're looking for. So they've pushed it, and they know that, you know, a lot of folks in the commercial market are going to want to do that too. And that's part of the fun of being a reloader, and having doing your own products at home, whether it be reloading ammunition, or if you make your own soap, or you make your own shoes or leather holsters or whatever it is, you put your own touch to it.
Yep.
And you can certainly still do that, but like Alex said, pay attention to your loading manuals, because sometimes with certain calibers, certain bullet weights, and certain powders, there can be 3, 4, 5 grains, 6 grains between min load and maximum load.
Yep.
Some powders, especially with the faster ones, it can be half a grain, 6/10, 8/10. I don't think I've seen really much less than a grain, but it can be a few tenths sometimes between minimum and maximum load. So pay attention to your loading manuals.
Definitely. And something that you addressed on earlier when we were going around some of the production machinery and stuff on the floor. When we're developing, say, for competition or something like that as reloaders, we're developing for a specific gun for a specific reason. When companies are working up load data, or when you guys here are developing loads for the public market, you've got to develop it for more than just like Joe Schmo's gun in mind. You're working across such a large range of platforms and stuff.
Right. We were talking about 380s at one point, and I showed you our test data and what we load to, what we test to for pressure and velocity, and then when we function test firearms, I said that I hold the grip down improperly and shoot it, because that is gonna, if the gun's gonna malfunction, that's really gonna help induce it. It's gonna make that gun malfunction. So if I'm shooting a two-hand strong-handed grip, one-handed, strong hand, weak hand, holding the gun up a little bit higher, because I teach people to shoot. I take on students like one at a time, maybe 1 or 2 a year. I don't believe in a large cookie cutter class shooting instruction, because I don't think that people get the hands-on, and everybody learns in different ways as well. But we do a women on target class, and I see the grips all the time, the cup and saucer, and
teacup.
They're just grabbing the very bottom of the gun, and they're not, especially semi-automatics, not made, there's a certain pressure that needs to be put against the grip of that gun so the slide can function.
Exactly.
So we're loading ammunition for the commercial market, which means it has to run in everybody's gun, from a Ruger to a High Point to a Staccato to an HK to a whatever, a SIG, a Glock, a Kimber, a Car, a High Point, whatever the gun is, whatever that firearm is, it has to chamber, it has to fire, it has to cycle, and it has to, pick up another round and load to be ready to go. So we're loading for, because a lot of people ask, well, why don't you use this powder? Why don't you use that powder? Why don't you load at this velocity? Because we need to load for the commercial market.
Exactly.
My competition ammunition for IDPA, I shot 135 grain 40 Smith & Wesson, and I ran it just over 1,000 feet per second. So that made the 125 power factor for IDPA all day long, every day. I switched, we stopped making the 135, switched to a 125, so I had to run it at 1,200 feet per second to make my 125 grain power factor. Actually, I had to run it just over 1,000 again, I think it was, just to hit 125, but I ran it like 1,100 just to be sure.
Give yourself a little bit of safety factor on it.
But our 40s, commercial loading, we want to have that same like 1,200 to 1,230 feet per second as the 9mm, because we got to function, 3-inch barrel Glocks, we got to function 5-inch barrel Glocks, we got to function, 2 3/4-inch barrel, whatever micro compacts out there these days. So we got to, it's for everybody. So the ammunition, and we have a pretty good suite of test firearms, which you saw. He cried.
Tears of jealousy.
Yeah,
just
tears of jealousy. But I'm always looking. Oh boy, here's a new gun. Especially if it's a compact, subcompact, they can be problem children sometimes. Hey, I submit. I got to go buy this gun. We just want it because, no, we need it. We need to shoot it because it's extremely popular and we need to make sure it functions. So, you know, we do the best we can. And there's going to be times, and I will tell you from a customer service standpoint from CenterFire, if you buy bullets from us for reloading or ammunition and you have a problem and it's a legitimate problem, it's something that, you know, we can fix, call me, email me, and we will fix it. And it might be, we'll send you a new box of ammo, we'll send you a new box of bullets, whatever it is. And a lot of other ammo companies do not have that kind of customer service. You know, if you buy a box of, and not knocking anybody, but you get a box off the shelf, take it home, and you have 2 misfires in that box. You go back to the sporting goods store that you bought it from, or the retailer you bought it from, and say, hey, I bought brand X ammunition, and 2 of them didn't go off. I'm not going to shoot any more of it. They're going to look at you and say, so? If you get our ammunition, I don't care who you buy it from, give us a call. Eventually your call or your email will find me and we'll get you taken care of. And nobody else is going to do that for you.
And I will say, at least in the testing and development phase that you guys have seen in previous videos and stuff, these guys have been fantastic to work with. It's really been a pleasure to be able to put this together and stuff.
Good. It's supposed to be fun.
I guess last question, at least off of the ones that were like I pre-drafted here or that reviewer submitted. For a public range or for like a privately owned indoor range, using, say they have like a dedicated bay for CenterFire frangible only type munitions, do you have any kind of like recycle program for the copper tin powder dust, or how does that work, or is it traditional recycling?
It's going to depend on how the range handles it. So we have, and I'll give one range in particular, Boston Rifle and Boston Gun Club. They're right outside of downtown Boston. That range was built, I think, in the 60s.
Oh, wow.
And it had lead, lead was in the air, in the ground, in the lockers where members stored their stuff. And they were going to get shut down. The city was gonna close them down because when you walked in there, all you could taste was, you know, metal and coconut, and that's lead. We talked about that.
Which I didn't know.
And when you see the black coating on everything, so they contacted us and said, hey, we're going to get closed down, but we heard about you guys. And I said, well, then you're going to need, first of all, you're going to need to clean your range. So they did. And it cost them some money. They had to get rid of all the lead that was stuck in their range. They had to clean out their ventilation system. They had to wash their walls, their floors, everything to get rid of all this lead. And that cost them some money. And now they shoot our green line ammunition. That's all they shoot. Our green line ammunition, which has a lead-free primer, lead-free frangible bullet, they sweep it up, and it's copper. So little trivia, you're not allowed to use a push broom on an indoor range. It's a OSHA EPA thing because it kicks up too much lead dust.
Right.
If you're only shooting CenterFire, that's a moot point because there's no lead. So you can use a push broom.
So that explains why a lot of indoor ranges use squeegees.
Absolutely it does. Absolutely it does. So, yes, they can get that copper scrap, and it's dust and fragments and particles, and they store it in a 55-gallon drum until it's full, and they're able to sell it. And you'll get prevailing copper scrap price for it.
Okay.
Now, if you have a range that shoots a mix, that can be a little difficult because you've got lead, you've got jacket, you've got plastic, you've got whatever, mixed in with that copper dust. If it's got lead in it, if it has lead in it, it's probably going to get treated as lead.
Yeah.
There's some ranges that, they have the sticky pads out in front of the door where it helps clean off the bottom of your shoes. You have to wash your hands. They have lead wipes. They have, all this stuff made to help clean up lead, because lead it's a huge issue And if you've worked on an indoor range, I'm telling you, go get your lead levels checked.
Yeah.
Because and lead poisoning, another rabbit hole we'll go down, but it's a lot like Lyme's disease. My lead levels aren't high because obviously I work here, and I shoot indoors all the time, almost on a daily basis. I mean, you saw how much in-service testing we did today. So, and I don't have, I know I have a lead level, but I know it's not elevated because I still get tested about every 5 years. If I was working on an indoor range, even a properly ventilated indoor range that shot a lot of, lead-based ammunition, I'd get tested on a yearly basis, and that range would have to pay for it most likely because I'm an employee there. So if you have a range that has a dedicated bay that only shoots centerfire projectiles, you're going to have to figure out how to not contaminate it with lead or any other hazardous type material,
Right.
To be able to get that recycling out of there. So the best example is Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, FLETC. They shoot 95% lead-free down there, and 90% of that 95% is a centerfire projectile. Whether it's loaded by Winchester, Federal, Spear, whoever, it's our bullet. So they have specific traps built to catch that copper scrap, convey it out to a vacuum system that puts it in 55-gallon drums. When those drums are full, they sell it as copper scrap. They get copper scrap price.
Right.
That money comes back in to improve their range or even augment costs of ammunition.
Nice.
So they call it the life cycle. The ammunition comes in, it gets fired, it gets recycled, comes back as money, and everybody's happy. So, and if you look at, lead-free ammunition costs, they can be a little bit higher. It's copper, lead-free primers. So you're going to want an ammunition on your range that can add value to your range with be able to shoot steel targets indoors, no ricochets, cleaner for your employees. Lead testing can go away, lead cleanup can go away. So there's all the savings. You're paying more for the ammunition on the front end, but on the back end of all these associated costs with what I just mentioned, cleanup, testing, abatement plans, all these things, and then you can make some money off of it collecting it.
Right.
But again, it can't be contaminated with anything else.
Right.
So you're either going to have a dedicated range or a dedicated bay in your range to collect this stuff for recycling.
Definitely. I think that about wraps it up for the questions we have here.
Okay.
Thanks so much to Keith and the guys over here at CenterFire for having me out here. It's been a real pleasure to be able to tour the facility, get to visit some of the testing stuff.
Yep. Good.
If only I could have some of that testing tech for reloading, but obviously it's more of a commercial budget kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a little expensive. It's a little expensive. And some of your reloading manuals will talk about some of that equipment.
Yes.
And you can look them up, HS Precision, PCB Electronics, Ayler,
Yes.
Ballistic Testing Systems.
Believe it or not, the Lee manual actually goes into their pressure testing systems.
Yes.
I was fascinated. I was like, wow, they covered it. But
Yeah.
they really do.
Yeah, and it's a whole discipline basically of how to test. We talked about types of brass, the gauges, the electronic, what I call it, voodoo or magic or something that happens with all the.
Yes.
Yeah. The voltage regulators in the Ayler equipment. They turn all that data into readable information. And again, that tells you, you have your recipes being reloader and how that recipe, it shoots, 850 feet per second, your 230 grain ball load for your 45 auto. But that recipe a year from now, because primer, powder, brass, and bullet lots have all changed, now that same 850 feet per second could actually be, instead of being 21,500 PSI for standard average pressure for a 45 auto, it could be 22.5.
Yep.
And you're going to start to abnormally wear out your gun because you're shooting higher pressure ammunition through it, and you don't know it. it won't show any signs of pressure. That's not that much, but if you're a high volume shooter,
Right.
it could add up to some adverse wear on your firearm.
Public service announcement on that bit there. If you are changing lots or any kind of components, run it over chrono, see what you got.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're pushing up against the top of like a pressure limit or whatever, just use some common sense, be safe with it.
Yeah, you can tell a lot by changes in velocity. You
Yes.
really can.
Yep.
I've done it, as a reloader myself. When I saw that, at first I was all excited. Oh, I'm getting more velocity out of this. This is this isn't, and we use a lot of shotgun powders like red dot, blue dot, green dot in a lot of straight wall pistol, like 44 mag, 44
Yep.
special. And we've loaded 44 mag all the time. We've hunted with it for years. And you get a brand new keg of red dot, and we're shooting a 200 grain cast bullet, I think. I think we were running 1250 or 1300 feet per second out of a 5-inch barrel-ish. And I remember we were getting velocities of like 1500.
Ooh.
And same powder charge. New lot, it was a
Wow.
different lot of powder. And we had an 8-pound keg of red dot, so it lasted for years.
Yeah.
So, and powder will deteriorate
Yes.
over time. If you have a keg of powder that your grandfather had, and some of these kegs of powders can be 20 years old, 30 years old,
Yeah.
40, 50 years old, you might want to think about, maybe you can test it with a load and you'll get some erratic results. You might want to dispose of that powder. It can draw moisture.
Yep.
It can deteriorate. You open a new keg of powder and you get that ether smell. That's okay. But if that keg's been sitting around too long and you don't get that smell, or it's overbearing strong, that means that powder's starting to deteriorate.
Yep.
And read your loading manual. Your loading manual will talk about powder storage.
Yes.
There's
Absolutely.
a lot to learn out there. So, the internet, but I like books myself. There's a lot to learn out there about gunpowder, primers, storage. I mean, why are cartridge cases nickel plated? Do you know?
Bar cartridge case, nickel
Why
plate.
are cartridge cases nickel plated?
Easier extraction, easier visibility as far as chambers. They won't corrode like brass will when they're subjected to, like, depending on the type of your sweat and stuff, will corrode brass a lot easier. Those are the main three I can think of.
Okay, you're right on one of them.
Which one?
Corrosion.
Okay.
So, and your viewers are going to hate me for this, but
Always learning.
always learning. There is no data anywhere that says nickel-plated cases chamber and extract better, easier than brass cases. There's no data.
Really?
None. Nobody has ever done a test to say this is the friction coefficient. And nickel-plated cases probably have a lower friction coefficient as far as brass do, but there's no data anywhere.
Interesting.
If there was, the military would be using it. They don't.
That's fair.
And that's cost also.
Right,
Nickel-plated
right.
cases cost a little bit more. I've read this in 3 different books. Rifle's done because it's sexier,
Yeah.
but they started nickel plating cartridge cases because of leather.
Yes.
So
That's the one I've seen.
back in the day, cartridge cases, 380 Special, 357 Magnum, those were pretty much the only 2 calibers. So we'll say, police officers in the 1940s. Yeah, some of them carried 1911s. But predominantly, the wheel gun ruled.
Yep.
And they either carried them in leather dump boxes or dump pouches, or shell loops in a leather belt. Because leather, Sam Brown police leather belts are still around. Most of them don't have dump boxes or cartridge loops, dump boxes or cartridge loops. But when you put that brass case in that cartridge loop and then let it in there for a year, the acid and different things in the leather used to tan it and preserve it will turn that cartridge brass green.
Yes.
And that corrosion, and there's a technical term for that I can't recall right now, but I'll look it up because I know I've read it. that can cause, stress, corrosion, fractures in that brass, and can cause a case to split.
Yep.
Normally, if you can just wipe it off, you're pretty safe.
Right.
But when it gets,
Actually into the...
like I've heard a guy describe it as cancerous.
That's a good description.
When it gets to that point, you want to dispose of it.
Yep.
So nickel plating solved that issue. So that's the predominant reason why pistol cartridge cases were nickel plated. And I challenge you to find a better answer than that. I do. Because if I'm wrong, I want to know. But that's what I've read from a couple different sources that have spent their whole life researching ammunition and car. Because there's people that collect stamps, cars, guns, purses, boots, whatever. There's people that collect cartridges. They're cartridge collectors.
Yep.
Some of them collect any cartridge they can, but some of them are a special kind of crazy and only collect one kind. So I have a friend of a friend who is a 9mm cartridge collector. And I have 3 books in my office that have up to the early 2000s. They have a collection of 9mm ammunition from all over the world, governments, ammunition facilities, and it's all the same. It's all 9mm Luger, and it's all different. And it's insane to learn that there were that many types of 9mm ammunition out there. So they know a lot of information, useless information sometimes, and trivia. But yeah, so again, educate yourself on stuff. There's no data to say, there's data on flat base bullets versus bow tail bullets. The military's done this testing. Which one erodes a throat in a firearm faster? According to the military's testing, after so many rounds, a bow tail bullet will erode a throat faster, but you're talking over 10,000 rounds. So
you're looking service
and,
life
and certain loads and service life and different powders and flame temperatures and whatnot. And which bullet's more accurate, a flat base bullet or a bow tail?
Oh, you're asking me that?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Depends on what range you're shooting it at.
Okay, that's a good answer.
A lot of people give a flat base a ding for accuracy potential, and they're trying to shoot them out to like 600-800 yards. Whereas the ballistic drag on the tail, you're getting that vortex, whereas with the boat tail, it's significantly reduced. Up close, or even inside a couple hundred yards, depends on the bolt manufacturer.
So I've had many ballistic engineers tell me that out to about 500 yards, there's no difference in accuracy.
I could believe that.
Between a flat base bullet and a bow tail. It's just how it flies. And one of the ways I explain this to people is I take a wiffle ball and a baseball. They're both round, they're both balls. Which one has the higher ballistic coefficient? Baseball does.
Right.
It's smaller.
You don't have all the drag.
It's heavier, and you don't have all the drag that the wiffle ball does. But from me to you away, I can throw the baseball and hit the button on your shirt 10 out of 10 times. And I can do the same thing with the wiffle ball.
Yep.
But if you go stand over there at the end of the wall, which is about 8 yards, I can probably throw the baseball like this and hit the pocket on your shirt. But the wiffle ball, I'm probably going to have to throw harder. So it's how it flies.
Right.
There's less wind resistance. That baseball has a higher ballistic coefficient because it's smaller, kind of rounder, heavier, and doesn't have all those holes in it.
Right.
But which one's more accurate? Well, from me to you away, neither one. They're both just as accurate.
Yep.
But over distance, it's how it flies. Exactly. So yeah, you got that right. What other?
What's that? One for two so far?
Well,
that was a multi-part question on
it's
the
not. It's just education because man, the arguments I get into because you walk into any bar in Pennsylvania and say which one's more accurate, a flat base or a boat tail?
Oh,
yeah. Which one's going to feed in your gun better, brass case or nickel plated? Nickel plated. Okay, all right. So there again, there's evidence with, you know, the flat base versus bow tail with accuracy, throat erosion, steel jackets. Did you ever hear of steel jacketed bullets?
Like a bimetal jacket?
No, a steel jacket. So as a kid, all the old timers, my grandfather, he always said he had this special 30-06 ammunition. It was military. It was a steel jacket because a magnet would stick to it.
Oh.
And I thought, being a little kid, I thought, whoa, steel jacket. So it has steel core,
right,
as a penetrator.
Yep.
But in World War II and World War I, to augment production, you know, metal was in demand.
Mm-hmm.
So a certain amount of iron was added to the copper, zinc, gilding metal jacket material to augment production.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a little bit of iron in some of the jackets, but that wasn't steel. If you
Right,
shot a
right.
steel cased, you know, a steel jacketed bullet down a steel barrel,
Your rifling wouldn't last very
you
long.
get like 500 rounds and your barrel be gone. I have that argument all the time. And I said, okay, bring me one of your rounds to the bar next week,
Yep.
you know, for breakfast. And they do. And I say, all right. And I actually take my pocket knife and peel some of the jacket off. And if you can pick it up with a magnet, that means it was probably produced between World War I and World War II and does have some amount of iron in
Right.
that jacket. But typically you got to have like a super strong magnet to even get it to twitch. But when the magnet sticks to the bullet, that doesn't mean the jacket's steel. It means the core. There's a steel penetrator core in those rounds. So, yeah, a steel jacket. I was just thinking about that this morning, actually, about the myth of steel jackets. There's a whole bunch of other myths out there in the ammunition market. We don't have time to cover them, but maybe in another installment. Or
If you want to see
something.
if you want to see a future episode with Keith here,
Yeah.
let us know in the comments section. We might be able to get that arranged.
Yeah,
he
let
doesn't
us
live
know.
too far away.
I don't. And I'm happy to come to you when we get time here after hunting season, holidays, SHOT Show. Then I'll have a little bit more time. Right now, it's rough. So yeah, do you have any more that we need to cover on there?
I think that covers pretty much all the main questions on this end. Any questions on your end or anything else to add?
No, I'm glad to see that, you know, young person like yourself has gotten into reloading and shooting, and you're trying to pass that education on. You know, this guy's doing it with, you know, some bare essential equipment here and making good videos. I've watched, I think, every one of his YouTube channel's videos, and everything's been great. So it's really nice to see. It's refreshing to see a young person, you know, get out there and do this kind of stuff. And you're not doing it for the money.
No.
You're not doing it for the glory, right? You're passing on the knowledge.
Yes.
And
that's the goal.
And you know, one of these days, you could be wrong. So can I, right? I'm gonna be, and that's how we learn. Yeah. You know, one of your viewers is gonna say, "Hey, hold on a second. I don't know that, you know, this is exactly correct, or can I do it that way?" Because I've learned from that myself, and I'm still gonna do it. But it's refreshing to see you put yourself out there, and because so many people they make a couple videos on how to cook something or how to load something or how to fix a build, and they just get hammered with a lot of negative comments and they quit. They give up. And I haven't looked at all of your questions and comments yet. I haven't really delved that deeply into it yet. I will. But hopefully it's not a lot of negativity. I really, really hate that. It's so discouraging to people trying to do what you're trying to do. And, you know, TOUR-SinterFire and myself, I have a lot of videos out there that pertain to, you know, shooting and our products.
Yep.
And, you know, the negative comments, it's very discouraging. So if you have a negative comment, try to turn it into constructive criticism, not just throw it out there just because you can. But yeah, it's very refreshing to see somebody, you know, doing what you're doing and taking your level of professionalism as an amateur, taking your level of professionalism to say, I want to do the best I can.
Yep.
That's great to see, and we'll, you know, we're going to support that.
Well, it's much appreciated. And at this point, the channel is not even a year old.
Good,
So
yeah.
we're still getting into it. Hopefully we can maybe get a little bit of monetization or sponsorships or something and be able to afford a little bit better camera equipment. But for now, we're doing all right. So
Well, it's my battery. You have to give it back. So
again, special thanks to these guys for having me out here and
You're welcome.
hosting me for the day. If you have any questions, obviously drop them in the comment section. You can reach us at thereloadingcraft@gmail.com and find Keith's email. I'm sure your email's underneath your contact
yeah, it's
info
Keith,
page.
Keith @TOUR-SinterFire.com. Yeah.
And we'd be happy to answer any questions or work with you on further details and get you
Yep.
squared away whatever you need. So, thanks for watching the Reloading Craft channel. As always, stay safe out there, keep on reloading, and sometimes that means getting some Frangible and getting that reloaded too. Catch you guys later. What was I going to ask?
Faster powders, slower powders, more powder, less powder, gunpowder, primers, brass.
Got it.
See?
Tried and true. So public service announcement, scratch that. Public service announcement on that bit there.